And welcome, everyone. It's really great to be here. My name is Gabe Keller Flores, and I'm filling in for Shelly Graf, who's out east teaching. Really happy to be here. I also work in the office, so it's great to be here with everyone. Good to see the people on Zoom. I see you there. So if anyone here for the first time tonight, welcome. If you have any questions afterwards, feel free to talk to me or Tyler or Nico, who you met coming in. So we usually start with about 30-minute guided meditation, and then I'll share some reflections, and then we'll have time for talking together. So doing what you can to sit in a comfortable, relaxed, but also upright way. We can think of it maybe as sitting with dignity, a natural dignity that comes from sitting right in the middle of things as they are. With a heart that is open to the best of our ability. A body that's relaxed to the best of our ability. And a mind that is intentionally putting aside what the Buddha called desire and discontent for the world. And as we do our best to put aside habits of getting caught up with this or that, then we start to develop a new habit of mindfulness, bringing mindfulness to the fore, making it our primary intention. A mindfulness that is based in the body, not our idea of the body, but this felt reality of sensation and energy and movement, tension and ease, all the various flavors of having a body here and now, and seeing if it's possible to relax with this experience of the body just as it is. Not the body as we would like it to be or imagine it. Could be fear of how we imagine the body could be or is. Instead, we're just meeting the moment-to-moment flow of what we call the body, but is not a concept. So we can ask ourselves, what does it feel like here and now? How do I know there is a body? What's being known? These questions can just help us generate some interest in our direct experience. Is the body, the experience of the body, one thing, or is it an ever-changing river of sensation and pressure and tingling, flow of air moving in and out of the body? Can tune into the outer layer of the body, the skin and the contact with the air around us, pressure of our butt on the seat or cushion, feeling the form, the outline or the outside of the body, and also feeling the inside of the body. Energy moving, a sense of contraction in the muscles or release. And all of this is being known here and now. So whatever we notice as we turn our attention to our direct experience, whatever we notice is the way it is, the way the body is, the way the heart feels this evening, burdened or light, the energy in the mind, whether it's busy, active, or calm or tired. This is all part of the way it is that we can know directly, not in order to analyze it, judge it, but simply to be intimate with it. Be intimate with our lives as they are, here and now. So, doing our best to relax. Relax the body, relax the mind. And in that relaxing, which is an ongoing process, we find that the sensitivity, the natural sensitivity of our body and heart and mind become more obvious, more apparent. We relax and we feel. Feel the natural sensitivity of the body and mind, knowing whatever they're sensitive to. So just this, which we could summarize as sitting and knowing that we're sitting, just this simple practice can lead to deepening calm and deepening peace, a peaceful relationship with the way things are. So finding your own way to sustain relaxation and interest moment by moment, not forcing, not trying to have a certain experience, not pushing any experience away, but using whatever experiences are present to develop a continuity of interest, mindfulness, relaxation. So let's continue in silence now, doing the best we can and letting that be good enough. Noticing any ease arising from being mindful, even if it's subtle, not the loudest thing in the room. Noticing any amount of ease allows that ease to deepen, to fill more of the space of awareness, space of the body. So for the final few minutes, seeing if it's possible to more fully sit, in a sense, in the middle of our experience and in the middle of whatever ease might be present, the ease of being present. Thanks for your practice, everyone. Feel free to stand and stretch if you'd like. Feel free to greet your neighbor if you'd like. So thanks again, everyone, for being here. And thanks for being here on Zoom as well. If you came a little late, I'll just introduce myself again. I'm Gabe Keller Flores, and I've been coming to Common Ground for half my life. I can say that now, since I was in high school. So a long, deep history here. Even before we were in this building, we were in the founder's home, which is in Seward as well. So happy to be here. I also work here, but I don't teach that often, so it always feels like a fun experiment. Filling in for Shelly Graf, who usually leads on Wednesday nights, one of our guiding teachers. I kind of want to ask people why they're here, but it would probably take take some time to ask everyone, and everyone would probably have a different answer. It's good to reflect on why we come here and why we show up. But you're all here for some reason, so there's something there. I think it's important to, just honor that. For each of us, it's going to be different, but there's something, and it's not nothing. It's not a small thing, actually, even though it can seem like no big deal to put aside an hour and a half, for those of you who came in person, to drive, to get here, to be here with strangers, for those of you on Zoom, to put aside all the other things that you could do that would be more entertaining or relaxing, and to give your attention to hearing some teachings, reflecting on them. So this idea of motivation is something that the Buddha talked about, and I think for different people, we come to meditate or to listen to Buddhist teachings, probably for different reasons. And the Buddha had a teaching on motivation, so why we show up to practice. And he said there's four reasons or four kinds of people who practice. Those who practice for their own well-being, so probably for a lot of us, this is primary. I feel stressed, I feel burdened, whatever it might be. I'm looking for some reprieve, for some support in dealing with my life, dealing with my mind. So we show up. Maybe for others, so the second kind would be practicing for the benefit of others. So maybe in our lives, we serve others in a variety of ways and feel that we could learn something in these teachings that might be useful in how we show up for others, to support others. I'm actually blanking on all four. One of them must be practicing for neither, but that doesn't make much sense. In any case, the interesting one, the most interesting one, and the best one in the Buddha's opinion was those who practice for their own well-being and for others' well-being, so for both. And this might seem obvious, but I appreciate that the Buddha spelled that out, because it's all-inclusive. It's not orienting towards others' well-being at the expense of our own well-being, and it's not orienting towards our well-being at the expense of others' well-being. So what that actually looks like in our life, in our practice, he doesn't necessarily spell out in that teaching, but just that orientation, that this is possible and that this is what the Buddha saw as the best kind of motivation, is orienting towards what's good, what's for our well-being, including ourselves and including those around us. So to me, this is a really central and inspiring part of the Buddhist teachings, that they're not solely self-care in the sense that we might think of that or hear that word used these days. It's not just about relaxing. It's not just about feeling better, although that's part of it. And it's not just about altruism and serving others. It's about deeply, in the deepest way possible, aiming towards the deepest kind of well-being for ourselves and others. So it's a kind of lofty aspiration, and yet for me it's always felt true. Like, that is what I wish. I do wish for the deepest freedom and happiness and well-being and safety for myself and for others. And we may not know how that aspiration gets acted out. We may not know all the details, but knowing that can be our aspiration, I find helpful. So that's sort of a roundabout way of introducing what I want to talk about, which is broadly this intersection of how our practice, whether we're meditating or practicing in daily life, in relationships, and engaging with the world, how these can support each other and really go together. I think I don't really see them as separate. There's a manuscript that I've read by a teacher I really like, Gil Fronsdal in California, and the title is The Equivalence of Ethics and Enlightenment. And so a lot of my thoughts in this area come from that and other sources. But to me, that title kind of sums it up and really aligns with my experience that the path that the Buddha taught could be described as a path of ethical maturation. So in developing more mindfulness and bringing it to different areas of our life, we become more sensitive ethically on a whole range of levels, from the obvious kind of moving about in our lives, having relationships with in our speech, in our actions, in our livelihood. Those are 3 of the 8 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. So, more than a third of the path is this outward part, speech, action, livelihood. So bringing mindfulness to that, or whether it's on a subtle level, just in our own minds, are we cultivating ill will in our own minds towards whoever it feels justified to cultivate ill will towards, someone that's wronged us, a political figure. So we become increasingly sensitive on this ethical level simply by practicing mindfulness. You might even notice, whether it's now after sitting for half an hour, or when you sit at home, or if you've ever done a meditation retreat where you're quiet for a weekend and practicing, we become more sensitive. And part of that sensitivity is an ethical sensitivity. We're wired to be empathetic. We're wired to notice what feels ethically off in others, in ourselves. And the Buddha really encouraged this. We might see it as a burden, this ethical sensitivity. It would be easier if we didn't have it. But the Buddha said that it's a guardian of the world, because it's this ethical sensitivity that both supports our own well-being and happiness, because we become more and more sensitive to the ways that we act out, or even just in our own minds, cultivate ill will or greed or delusion in ways that are actually leading to harm to ourselves or to others. So we've seen that more subtly, and and becoming sensitive to how we're impacted out in the world. And I think Mark Numberg, founder of Common Ground, guiding teacher, says, what's good about sensitivity is that the only thing that can really help us manage that sensitivity is wisdom and is compassion. So it's kind of like we're developing both of these at the same time. The more sensitivity we have, life becomes more intense. We feel things more. We feel our own internal world more. We feel the impact of the world we live in more. And it prompts questions and sort of demands something that will help us meet that in a more stable way, in a more wise way, in a way that's discerning what is helpful, what's skillful, and what's not. And also opens our heart because it just becomes so clear the more sensitive we are how unmanageable the world is, let alone, well, our minds as well, just to sit in meditation for 30 minutes and the mind is unmanageable. It's wild. So just this meeting the nature of reality really sensitizes, tenderizes our heart. But it doesn't just stop there where we're just kind of bare and exposed and vulnerable. We are vulnerable. And it's the wisdom of knowing that we're vulnerable that lets us act more skillfully in the world, because we're not pretending that we're not vulnerable, that we're not affected. There's a quote, I think it's from the Zen tradition. Normal people, ordinary people feel that they're vulnerable some of the time, and wise people know that they're vulnerable all of the time. And this is not how we often think about wisdom or kind of spiritual strength. We can imagine being invulnerable. Imagine that what the world needs, what our life needs, is some sort of invulnerability where we're not touched, where we're not affected, where we're, that ideal we can have of a perfect person who just, if just shows up and is always able to serve others or say the perfect thing at the perfect time. But in my experience, pretending to be that person or judging myself because I'm not that person, it doesn't actually make me more skillful. What seems to make me more skillful is just that willingness to be real, to be the vulnerable, imperfect person that is affected, that is touched, but that is also cultivating an honesty and kind of that need, being honest about that need for wisdom, that need for something supportive that will allow me to meet reality. And so I think this is sort of how practice unfolds. It's sort of this sort of cause and effect relationship where we're developing sensitivity and we're also developing wisdom and compassion, trust in wisdom and compassion that lets us be at ease with that sensitivity. Joseph Goldstein, one of the founders of the insight meditation movement in the West, also talked about it in a similar way, that through practice we're sort of expanding the edges of what we feel is within our range of what's tolerable, what's acceptable experience. And we can start practice with maybe a very narrow range, and then just over time, just through that process, it's not something we even have to aim for. It's just what happens as we practice in that open way, meeting whatever arises. So we don't have to go looking for, the hardest thing to open to. It sort of has its own natural unfolding. So I want to share a few specific teachings that I think are part of that toolbox of support that we can draw on as we're developing our sensitivity. What are the qualities of heart that allow us to be in this world, to be in this life that is so wild and unpredictable, unmanageable, and to not close our hearts, to care, to show up. Sometimes in thinking about engagement in the world, we talk about sustainability, like we want we want a kind of way of being and showing up and caring about the world, caring about our relationships that's sustainable. I was reading something from Winnie Nazarko, who's a teacher in this tradition, and she was telling a story of she was involved in activism around, I think, protection of women against violence when she was younger. And there was an older woman who was an activist and said something like, you want the kind of approach where you can do this for 50 years or something like that. So what is going to be sustainable for us for the long term? You know, whether that's in our lives, dealing with the personal challenges we have, or whether it's when we look at the state of the world. You know, what kind of heart can be engaged in the long run? Yeah, for me, that's such a provocative question. It's like, and clarifying, you know, that whatever wholesome intentions we have for our life and for our engagement in the world, it makes sense to think of that, as something ongoing that we're cultivating. So, the Buddha's whole approach to his teaching was pragmatic and compassionate. It was addressing suffering. That was his primary concern, the suffering that beings experience, whether that's stress, whether that's what we could really call suffering, deep suffering. And there's different levels at which we can see how suffering arises. There's the more subtle levels and there's the more obvious levels. And I think one of the themes in my practice over the last several years has just been appreciating how even that distinction, there's the kind of the deeper levels of suffering and there's the more obvious levels of suffering, just how much they interrelate. So, and the Buddha was really clear about this, you know, even in describing how deep states of meditation and calm, tranquility arise that then lead to insight and the deep, you know, liberation of the heart. In some of these sequential lists, one of the first factors might be something like our attention to our ethical conduct. Because if we basically can feel good about the way that we're living, we're doing our best to not cause harm, that leads to the mind being more at ease and settling, which supports our meditation and so on. So this level of our relational lives has, you know, is one of the sources of, for sure, suffering in our lives, but also because of that is one of the areas for healing and for happiness. And I think sometimes, maybe because this is a meditation center or, you know, our tradition, meditation is really important, we can sometimes forget that most of our lives we're not meditating. And what is the quality of our minds and hearts in those moments? And what are we practicing? What are we cultivating in those moments to see our practice as a whole life practice? Not just in sort of a superficial, conceptual way, but actually practicing mindfulness in our life. And so in our daily life, a lot of what we can be mindful of may not be the minute, moment-to-moment physical sensations, but we can be aware of our intentions. You know, in this moment, what is the overall flavor of the mind? Am I cultivating ill will or resentment? Am I cultivating curiosity, a desire to understand? So one list that I really recommend is the paramis, which can be translated as virtues, or literally it's perfections. But yeah, they're things like generosity and ethical conduct, renunciation, wisdom, truthfulness, patience, determination, loving kindness, equanimity, and I'm probably forgetting one. It's always hard to remember all 10. It's like a Buddhist quiz. But these are values that are found in many spiritual traditions, and we could just think of as, in a way, basic human wisdom. What's skillful, what is supportive, and what's sort of onward leading or elevating in a way. I think of the paramis as they feel like they elevate me, not like I'm above life, but I'm sort of above my more baser kind of self-preservation, instinctual, it's kind of getting through, getting by, kind of pushing, shoving, complaining. So they kind of remind me of an aspiration that my whole life could be a teacher, could be a way that I'm strengthening wholesome qualities in my mind. So they're great for turning our challenges, for reframing our challenges as teachers, opportunities for patience. They illuminate areas where we could easily justify, for example, telling a lie or ill will or whatever it might be. And they ask, is that actually going to be what's most supportive for my well-being and for others' well-being? Or is there a way of framing this where it's not just about me getting what I want or having things be easier, but it's almost a cliche, but it's a powerful practice as an opportunity. What qualities of heart could be developed here that will actually be something I can rely on more than just a particular outcome? We can think of what kind of person we would want around in a crisis or when we need support. And it might be somebody that has some of these qualities. And we can think of different people in our lives or historical figures, or just sometimes these paramis we think of as personal power in a way, or just they can be impressive. We can notice them. They can stand out when you meet someone who's just naturally has a lot of metta or goodwill, kindness. It's like, it's a power. It has an effect. It puts people at ease. It makes them feel welcome, makes them feel like they don't have to be afraid. That is useful, besides just being beautiful and healing. So we could think of developing these qualities, again, as being for our own well-being, because they strengthen our capacity to meet life and its challenges, but also they're for others' well-being, because when we show up with more of these wholesome qualities, we're more likely to be skillful, to have space, to tend to others, to hear them. Wisdom, I think that's the parami I forgot, wisdom. Kind of the discerning quality, what's skillful, what's not skillful. There's an article, I might just post it on our blog. I found it really useful, and maybe others will too, but it's called The Buddha as an Activist by Gil Fronsdal, this teacher in California. Maybe I'll just read a bit from it. What he's talking about in the article is what I would describe as the Buddha's ethical activism. And partially, he gives some sort of context for the Buddha and the time that he lived at. So he says, the Buddha clearly and actively advocated for the welfare of the whole world, including encouraging his followers to work for the benefit, welfare, and happiness of many people. In this way, he was an activist. However, living in the Bronze Age in countries ruled by kings, the Buddha could not have been an activist in how the word is commonly used in modern times. There were no laws to change, as governing was at the whim of kings, no elections to influence because there were no elections, and no economic system to reform, as there were none of the economic systems, policies, or institutions at play in our modern world. In the primarily agrarian world where he lived, with just the beginning of an urban society of craftspeople and merchants, the Buddha lived in a time and place where person-to-person contact and relationships were primary influences on people's daily lives. Therefore, instead of legislative, political, or economic activism, the Buddha focused on changing how people treat each other. As such, his activism was focused on establishing ethical behavior as the foundation for how a society operates. While he frequently and personally advocated for people to avoid harming others, he was an activist because he encouraged others to also advocate for this. Through his followers, he worked to spread his ethical activism out into the societies of his time. So it's interesting to think of the Buddhist teachings arising, obviously in a certain context, time and place. So, society is more complex now. We are more obviously interrelated in more complex ways than we can really kind of wrap our heads around. So there's probably a lot that we could explore in the differences between the Buddha's time and now, and how his teachings can be helpful even as we navigate, living in this complex world. But I think this ethical activism still is a powerful and maybe one of the deepest forms of activism, because regardless of the systems that we live in and their complexity and how we can't completely comprehend them, and we're sort of, born into different systems and institutions, and we can't control all of that. It's not just about how we relate to other people on a day-to-day level. And yet, I was thinking about this like a thought experiment. We imagine, take this country we live in, the United States, and all the imperfect institutions that make it up. But if we imagine people, everyone in our society, with the systems more or less staying the same, in terms of institutions and hierarchy and laws, but people really being committed, really having a deep personal, not coerced from the outside, but actual kind of something that they'd reflected on and deeply committed to, set of ethical standards, not basically being committed to not harming in however, however ways they could, however many ways they could, how different society would be. So I think this ethical activism is still really relevant. And I'll read a bit more from Gil. He says, as challenging as it is, the Buddha's activism is rooted in the main aim of the spiritual practice he taught, namely to become free from greed, hatred, and delusion. If one is not free of these, the Buddha instructed his disciples to work to constantly remove them. One would thereby also be free of acts of body, speech, or mind that are born from greed, hatred, and delusion. Such activism would have no hostility, deceit, and no use of brute power to defeat others. Instead, it involves searching for ways to change the hearts of others so they would want to be ethical, perhaps following the high standards the Buddha taught. Doing such Buddhist activism is neither easy nor fast. It requires strong confidence in the value of ethical behavior. It also requires a strong determination to avoid any activism influenced by greed, hatred, and delusion. It is activism that aims to change the psychological foundation from which unethical behavior arises. Regardless of how idealistic this may seem, it is working to replace fear with generosity, love, and wisdom as the foundation of society. And he ends with a quote from the suttas, the discourses of the Buddha. Among types of beneficent conduct, among the best is prompting, settling, and establishing an unethical person in ethical behavior. So, the Buddha did have high standards. I actually have a tattoo. I won't show it to you because it's under my shirt, but it's a saw. It's the simile of the saw, which is a kind of famous discourse where the Buddha's laying out one of his high bars. The simile goes that even if bandits were to capture somebody, you can imagine, and saw off the person's limbs with a two-handed saw, that the person who would give rise to a mind of ill will would not be following the Buddhist teachings, but instead the person should have goodwill towards these people, and from there radiate goodwill out in all directions. I think the story requires some maybe caveats that the Buddha is not condoning the behavior of the people who are sawing. The way I interpret it is, and the Buddha then goes on in that, after telling that story, to, I think there were some monastics who were basically kind of, this happened a lot apparently, getting into fights or, they weren't all peaceful. They had quarrels and disagreements and conflicts. So the Buddha was sort of saying, well, if even in this situation, basically use that as an example, just how high of a bar that is. But because I always see the Buddha's aim is not about setting some ideal that we then compare ourselves to and feel bad about, or feel like, oh, that's impossible, that's idealistic. I think the point is that ill will isn't helpful. It's totally understandable to have ill will in that situation or in any situation, but is it helpful? And there's some other teachings on goodwill that I think can clarify what the Buddha is pointing to by goodwill. There's another teaching where there's some monastics and they're living near some snakes that are potentially harmful, and then they start wishing well to the snakes, but the way they wish well, one of the phrases is, may the snakes be well, may they depart. So it's not that they love the snakes necessarily or like them. So this distinction between, liking, loving, but this goodwill, this absence of ill will, which might mean, like in that situation, it doesn't mean we have to be close, intimate. It just means I wish you well, and I wish what's best for both of us. And maybe in this situation, it's best that we are not living so close together. So there's a lot I could say around metta. I've explored that a lot recently too, and in particular to try to tease out things that maybe are similar to metta, but as I currently understand it, the power of metta is the power of kind of this wisdom exploration of, is it useful? Is ill will useful? Is it functional? Is it in our best interest and in the interests of others? And does goodwill, how is goodwill actually helpful, functional, even in situations where there may be conflict, there may be boundaries that need to be set? But in terms of our own heart, we probably have all experienced the suffering of ill will, of resentment, of hatred. In my own life, in recent years, there's been kind of situations where I felt more justified in ill will than maybe at any other time in my life. It seemed very clear someone else had harmed me. And just that, the self-righteousness, the indignance. But it was so clearly suffering, so clearly not helpful. Taught me a lot about this distinction. It's not about condoning unskillful behavior. It's not about not having boundaries, but just to be very clear about what is ill will, what does it feel like in this heart, and can we imagine a goodwill that actually wishes what's best for all beings? Doesn't mean we wish all beings to get what they want. If what they want is actually unskillful, would actually lead to their harm or lead to others' harm. But can we imagine a heart that at least isn't justifying throwing anyone out of our heart? So this is obviously a exploration, but for me, that's the reason the Buddha sometimes sets these high bar. It's sort of to provoke us and to expand our imagination of what we think might be possible and what might be useful. I think a lot of how greed, aversion, and delusion keep their hold on us is they're so natural. They're our second nature. They're actually what we trust in a way. It's sort of like as we practice, there's this changing of allegiance. Do we actually trust non-ill will, non-greed, non-delusion, or to what degree do we think that greed, aversion, and delusion are still the best way for me to get what I want? So what this, could actually look like in our lives, living at a different time than the Buddha and just in our own particular circumstances, our interests, what we're passionate about, what we're called to engage with in the world, what just our life circumstances kind of serve up for us. It's really a realm for creative exploration, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about this practice is we can take these principles like the paramis, for example, but as just ideas, that's one thing, they might be inspiring or they might seem too lofty, idealistic, no real import to the actual, lived experience. But that's for us to explore. Are they actually supportive? Do they actually inform and support us in meeting life as it is in a skillful way? That's really what the Buddhist teachings are about. It's not, I think it's Sayadaw Tejaniya, a Burmese teacher, who said that his teachings, they're not pessimistic and they're not optimistic. They're realistic. So I think that's how I see it. What we want is teachings that help us more and more meet reality. And reality is intense. We need support. We can't do it alone. We can't just do it through willpower. When we try those things, I think we get burnt out. We turn to distraction. So it's really a strengthening of our hearts so that we can meet life as it is in ways that are useful and skillful. One area I've been particularly interested in terms of maybe how the Buddhist time was different from ours and how our time may be unique in human history is what we could call the attentional ecosystem that we live in. And I think as people interested in mindfulness, we sort of have a unique, maybe, perspective on this. Probably we're all aware to some degree that, probably everyone in this room didn't grow up using smartphones and can remember a time when our attention was less sought after. And there's maybe actually some space for it to do the seeking and look around and consider. And even just saying that, to me, it just seems so obvious how more conducive to wisdom and to really all wholesome mind states that kind of attention is than an attention that is fragmented and constantly impinged upon and poked and prodded and sort of fed the most kind of provocative things. And it's, I could go on and on. This is really kind of something I think about a lot. And I probably don't have to convince everyone here that there's something happening to our attention. But I think where it maybe relates to this area of ethics and just how we, our deepest aspirations for how we show up in our lives and in the world, I think there's a way in which even something as recent as kind of the current attentional ecosystem defined by constant sort of impingement, we can get used to so much, even just in the course of the last 10, 15 years, which is really where, as I understand it, all this has ramped up. It can become normal so quickly. We're just so adaptable in a way as humans, So just the kind of the bigger perspective and the perspective that comes from bringing mindfulness to our attention and how it feels like in different environments and how it feels like just in what is normal, but that doesn't mean it's skillful. Just because something is normal, So this is where I think, and it's, again, this is another area with there's no roadmap for how we take care of our attention so that we can do what the Buddha recommended, which is wise attention. So he did talk about this. It's like where we put our attention and what kind of attention we use is sort of upstream from everything else that we do. So this is why I think it relates to ethics and everything, because we only have so much attention, we only have so much time. So from the Buddha's perspective, the question is where we're putting our attention and our time and our efforts, what are the results from that? And it sort of seems to me like, because sort of the norm, it seems, and I think there's more and more awareness and pushback against this, but more and more the norm is distraction, just more impingement than any kind of, than our human minds are designed for. And so it just leads to overload. And it sort of seems that, in particular, the Buddhist teachings on renunciation, I think, have a particular import here. It feels like we have to explore what letting go looks like, what putting something down looks like, because the default, to me at least, seems like endless distraction, endless, fragmentation. There's no way to attend to what's actually most important or skillful onward leading without putting aside everything that is less or not as important, not as... So meditation, mindfulness, these ancient tools, I think are really almost just more needed than ever. But again, even this, I can get a little, righteous about this. So for all of us, it's for us to explore. And I do have a lot of curiosity about, as much as people have some clarity around that the current attentional ecosystem isn't good, well, what do we do about it? To me, that is a really, really interesting question. And I think it's sort of something we can only find out by experimenting, by exploring, because it's sort of against the stream, and it's sort of putting something aside in order to make room for something else. So it's probably going to feel uncomfortable and unknown. So I might just leave it here and open it up, hear what thoughts people have, just see if there's any last words. This might be good. This is from Ajahn Sucitto, I think from a podcast he was on. He said, "If you don't set a direction for your life, the world will set it for you." So just really acknowledging that we are not independent ultimately. We are so influenced. As human beings, we're so social. We can't separate our own spiritual cultivation from how we are in our lives, and we can't separate how we are in our lives from our deepest aspirations and just the ecology of the society. It's all here, but we can take the time to try to discern, whatever that small voice is that aspires to something that's really beautiful, despite the world being full of suffering. Is there a way of being in the world that we can imagine that would feel, this is a good use of a human life, and that it requires some work. It requires some time and attention to discern that and to keep exploring that in our life. But I think that's what the Buddha meant when he said the path is good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end. That very exploration, even though maybe it's always unfolding and unfinished, it's beautiful. And I think the world needs more of that kind of positive vision and a sense that it is possible to aspire to something that's beautiful for our own well-being and for the well-being of others. So thanks for your kind attention. I'll leave my thoughts there, and we have some time, so it'd be great to hear from people how you've found your own maybe practice, how that's impacted how you are in your life and your relationships and your engagement in the world, and maybe also how your engagement in the world and your mindfulness in your life and your work has impacted your understanding of practice and your aspirations. And any questions about anything I've said? But it's pretty open, so what comes to mind for people? And Nico has the mic, so let's use that in the room. If you're on Zoom, you can just unmute yourself, and we'll hear you.
Gabe, I actually can start.
Thank you.
Because I've found this topic, or the one that you ended on, also very relevant as well. So, I think part of what's what's tricky for me about just bringing more focused attention to my day-to-day life is just kind of like breaking the automatic habit, right? It's just like so easy if you've put a lot of energy into your day and you're kind of like and it's getting towards the evening, and you're like, let me have a treat, and then it's just all of a sudden you pick up your phone and it's 2 hours later. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm curious if you have any, if there's anything that's worked well for you in terms of just like breaking that automatic habit, or yeah, just ways that you've just found getting more curious about the present moment.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I can relate. It's amazing. We have just to take that particular example of what we could say is like smartphone addiction, right? Like we have some of the world's smartest people and the world's richest companies and the world's most powerful technologies all aimed at our Stone Age brains to try to get us to look at these screens. So I think that's helpful, just that perspective and that kind of compassion and understanding. So for me, it's like I'm just super interested in this. I mean, even as someone who's really interested in this and who's sort of kind of slowly found my way to some kind of views about it and some understanding, to see how I can still get caught. It's like just to have, it can be a source of humility, can be a teaching on not self, and can be for me, I think one of the powerful maybe reframings too is even to talk about it, kind of like I did a little bit tonight and we're doing now. It's also a source of compassion. It's like, this isn't just me. This isn't just because I'm bad. Like, it's exploiting these systems. They're exploiting our psychological vulnerabilities. And that's something we can care about. And it's something we can care about and, try to educate ourselves as much about, think as deeply as much about, talk to each other about, see who else is talking about it. So this is sort of kind of like what I was saying. What's exciting to me about it is that it's so new and it's so, like the path forward is so uncharted. I feel like the only way, especially as mindful people, to me, I think we have maybe an important role to play because we have maybe some of the tools. It's sort of like we're in explorers. We can be mindful of that experience. Be mindful of the moment like, oh, I want something here. I think this is going to deliver. So that, that pull, I mean, they say somehow they can measure it, that like getting a notification on your phone produces like a dopamine hit or something that's the equivalent of cocaine. So like that, that might be somehow objectively true, but we can feel it. And I think in a way it's only through actually feeling, bringing mindfulness to how we're impacted by this particular system and just in general, because this one system is actually now the underlying attentional ecosystem for everything. So it's sort of the flavor of our world. So to really feel into that, I think this is just the Buddhist teachings. It's only by being intimate, by being mindful of suffering, that we can have some wisdom about its causes and the ways to release from it. So, yeah, there's a lot more I could say, but I think that to me is because as opposed to some sort of more like top-down approach, like just, abstinence or like, oh, this is bad, but to just kind of this empathic, like, what needs am I trying to get met here? How well do they get met? And what alternatives might there be? So, yeah, it's just an ongoing exploration for me, and I think the understanding that it's collective, not just personal, helps me see that any efforts I put in, even just in being mindful of it, like with the theme of this talk, are for my well-being and for the well-being of others, because anything I can learn is probably going to be useful to someone else. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. Time for maybe one more comment or quick question. You just have a minute or so.
Hello, my name is Maxwell. At the beginning, you said a little bit about that Zen saying, being vulnerable. I think that comes from a place where if you don't feel you can be vulnerable, it's coming from a place of almost shame that you can't express. And I just would wonder if you could speak a little bit more about that and about how that kind of perpetuates itself and just leads you into maybe not being authentic as you want to be in the world.
Yeah. Well, I don't have much time, but it sounds like you have a lot of understanding already, you know. And I like, just similar to what I was saying to Nico, like, you know, we can read books, we can read the Buddhist teachings, and they can sort of point us, but the Buddha based all of his teachings and the wisdom that comes from it on direct experience. So, you know, what is the experience of vulnerability? Or we may not even know the experience of vulnerability, like you're saying, because it's so well defended. So what are the defenses of vulnerability? What do I feel instead of feeling vulnerability, or when I'm sort of in the vicinity of vulnerability? Like you mentioned, shame. So what is the experience that I'm calling shame? What is that feeling? In my experience, the experience that we call shame, or that I call shame, it's one of the most unpleasant human experiences. So to bring our mindfulness to that is not a small thing. And yet it's a human experience, you know? We're such social animals that we have such deep yearning for belonging. And if we're avoiding every situation where there could be vulnerability, we're sort of avoiding real connection as well, which we long for so deeply. Yeah, so kind of following the threads of both what we're longing for and when we get close to it, you know, the reaction and the defense. But all of that can be felt and seen. And that's really the power of mindfulness, is that we go from the level of just our thoughts to what is this experience actually like? Can this be okay? And more and more then, those experiences become tolerable and within our range of what's okay to feel, and we're more free to experience the full range, which is beautiful. You know, we have a deep yearning for that. Yeah, so that's all I'll say for now, but thanks for that. Well, thanks again, everyone. Really lovely to be together. Thanks for your kind attention, and Nico has some closing announcements.